Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another one of our PAC-T tests. This time we have two more unconventional, non-traditional bullets, 115 grain Barnes TAC-XPD and the 125 grain Honey Badger by Black Hills. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put 5 rounds each onto these bullseye targets here, look at the score, look at the extreme spread of those two groups, and we're also going to be looking at the muzzle velocities and specifically the consistency of those muzzle velocities. That's going to be done at 15 yards. Then I'm going to swing over here where I have my ballistic gelatin set up, fire 1 round into that clear ballistic gelatin, 20% NATO blocks from a distance of 7 yards. And we're going to look at how each of these bullets performs. By the end, if you stick around, you're going to see which one of these two is deemed the winner, and we'll progress into the next go round of this season's PAC-T tests. Got it? Well, let's go ahead and start shooting. 115 grain Barnes XPD, bullseye target on the left. I'm shooting these with the HK VP9. And that's 5. Glancing at the velocities, they looked pretty good. And the hole that I can see in that target out there, that looks pretty good also. 16.2 feet per second standard deviation, and it recorded all 5 shots. Now we're going to switch gears and go to the Honey Badger 125 grain bullet. This is another one of these bullets that looks an awful lot like the Lehigh penetrator, extreme penetrator, that whole line. We're going to go ahead and do 5 shots at the bullseye target on the right. I think that the 9mm for self-defense is kind of right there, the sweet spot when you're at the 124, maybe the 125 grain bullets. 115s seem a little bit light based on my years of doing these PAC-T tests. 124, 125 seems awful good. 147s get a little bit heavy, a little bit slow, a little bit sluggish, but we'll see how it all plays out today. Bullseye target on the right. Here we go. A little bit slower round, it looks like. I think all 5 were recorded. Yes, indeed, 19 feet per second standard deviation. Not quite as good as the Barnes bullets, but glancing from right here, those two targets look really, really similar. Of course, I don't have the view that you do, but that's important. It looks like both of those bullets did pretty darn well. Now it's time to shift over and put 1 round each into the ballistic gelatin. Okay, we had a little bit of problems here. Both of these bullets, Barnes and the Honey Badger, I was trying to get them to shoot on this side to avoid the other ones I shot earlier. That's what you're looking at. But both of them, the first shots ended up squirting out the side, but I ended up having to shoot a second round into this gel block for each of those bullets. Now, very, very similar. In fact, they're stacked up right next to each other, at about, I'll say, a rough range estimate of about 13 inches of penetration. That's the Barnes. Just below it is the honey badger, and again, you're seeing some other bullets in there from some previous tests. We're going to get these all cut out, measured, weighed, and scored back at the house. You know, it really doesn't take too long to shoot these rounds. What takes a lot of time is extracting them from the gel block, weighing, measuring, scoring all this stuff, and then, of course, time to think about it and report that back to you. Now, you saw all the stuff that was happening. You saw the bullseye targets. You saw the gel block. What do you think? What is your choice for a winner right now? Well, it may be difficult to answer. I understand that because you don't have all of the data. Let's go through it and let's see if we arrive at the same answer by the time we're done. Well, just as a real quick recap, we were testing the Barnes TAC-XPD 115 grain and the Black Hills Honey Badger 125 grain bullet. Both are non-traditional, unconventional bullets because they have no lead in them. This is an expanding bullet. This is not. You probably realized that when you were watching earlier parts of this video. Now, oftentimes I recap this kind of stuff because I know folks jump around in the chapters of these different videos. So bear with me on that. Let's start by looking at the results of the bullseye target that was fired at 15 yards. Here, we're looking at the bullseye target for the Barnes bullets. Did a pretty darn nice job. We got a couple of them breaking into the 10 ring, 2 of them in fact. All the remainder of the rounds were in the 9 ring. This one right on the edge, but breaking into that 9 ring, and that officially counts as a score of 9. Overall score, 47 points out of 50, but 0 in the dead bullseye. The precision of this round, 0.966 of an inch. Again, less than 1 inch 5-shot group from 15 yards off the bench. 1,166 feet per second with 16.2 feet per second standard deviation. That's not too bad. I say that for consistency is not too bad. You know, on rifles, we like to get down into the single digits. Sometimes we see that in handgun rounds as well, even factory handgun rounds, but something 16 in the teens, I'm not going to complain about that either. Good consistency. You know, last time when we were testing the Novex 65 grain and the S&B XRG bullet, we saw about a 3/4 inch 5-shot group from one of those. Very, very good 5-shot group, but nothing too much to complain about here. The Honey Badger by Black Hills scored, you know, actually pretty darn similar. In fact, the rounds impacted in so similar of a location on the bullseye. 45 points, again with 0 in the dead bullseye. 1.25 inch group, roughly 1.236 of an inch. 1,041 feet per second out of the muzzle, and a standard deviation of 18.9, about 19 feet per second on standard deviation. Again, we're in the teens, a little bit higher than that, but I'm not going to complain much about that either. Now, of course, you have to realize that the Honey Badger is slower, always going to be, because it is a heavier bullet, 125 grain versus 115. That's very, very normal that we see that much of a difference between those two classes or categories of bullet weights in the 9mm Luger. Now, I do not record everything that goes on out there. One of the things that I don't record is when I am kind of warming up, and what I do is I shoot the recoil meter test at that time. I'll do about a 7-yard target, get a little bit of warm up on the trigger and all that. 5 shots with each of these into those targets. May as well get some trigger time and some practice on it. And then I use my Mantis X10 to record what they call the recoil meter. And I compare that, and that's what we're looking at right here. I compare that to a standard 9mm round, and that standard is and has always been, we started doing this about a year ago, it is the CCI Blazer Brass Full Metal Jacket 115 grain bullet. So really for shootability, I like to look at recovery time and muzzle rise. Recovery time 1.2 seconds for the Barnes TAC-XPD, 1.04 or pretty much 1 second for the Honey Badger. Now that's interesting because that heavier bullet actually allowed me to get back on target, recover, and get ready for the next round or the next shot. Means I could be getting my second shot off with the Honey Badger before I would have been recovered with the Barnes bullet, the 115 grain bullet. Let's go ahead now and look at muzzle rise. Now this is interesting. The muzzle rise, if this is 100% correct, was about 20 degrees, 19.6 actually, versus 26 degrees for the Honey Badger. And I say that that's interesting because it's almost counterintuitive. If that barrel is actually rising up that much more, of course, there's really not that much difference with just even 5 degrees. 5 degrees, that is probably more than 5 degrees right there. So maybe that's inconsequential. I think that the recovery time is a better indicator of shootability. To me, neither one of these rounds was snappy or problematic, and of course, through all of our shooting, we had flawless performance, excellent cycling from all of these rounds that we're testing today. Compared to our standard, let's go back to the table then, compared to our standard, recovery time so similar, muzzle rise actually a little bit more than our standard for both of these rounds, and we're seeing a little bit more recoil width and recoil angle generated by these rounds in comparison to the CCI Blazer Brass standard. So, take a look at those numbers if you're thinking about it, thinking about one of these 2 rounds. I don't see anything terribly different about this. I think both of them, again, are quite shootable rounds and candidates for your carry. Now let's jump into the terminal performance testing results. This is the big part. This is the important part because we could have rounds that literally went bullet inside bullet hole, 1 or 2 feet per second standard deviations differences, and all this great stuff on Bullseye and so on and so forth. But if that bullet does not perform correctly inside the target, our gel block, it is not a good round or a good choice for self-defense. So that's what this is all about. As you noted, hopefully, that these bullets had to pass through some of my old Carhartt jacket, one just like this with the blanket liner, and then 1/16 inch tooling leather before it gets into the 20% NATO gel block. And then it's got to do its job. It's got to penetrate, and our rules in this season, with all these tests that I'm doing this year, is it has to penetrate at least 4 inches, but no more than 22 inches. Both of these rounds did a good job inside the ballistic gelatin. Certainly nowhere close to being disqualified because of the under-penetration or over-penetration rule that we set early on. But let's look at all of those results now. On this table, we see the results of the Barnes on the left column versus the Black Hills Honey Badger on the right. The stuff on the top we've already talked about. That's the results from the Bullseye target test and the chronograph, LabRadar chronograph test. I will note, because we haven't talked about this yet, that the muzzle energy for the Barnes 115 grain bullet is more than we have with the 125 grain Honey Badger. 347 for the Barnes, 301 for the Honey Badger. And that is a function of the difference in speed or the velocity of those two bullets. What we're focusing on now, though, is that terminal performance, and look at such similar penetration. 13¼ inch penetration with the Barnes bullet, flat 13 inches with the Black Hills Honey Badger. And I measure to the nearest 1/8 of an inch. I really can't discern with these bullets anything finer than that at all. It's just, I mean, I could measure that and call it, 13 1/16 or 1/64 of an inch, but that would just be lying to you. I'd be making up that level of precision. Retained weight, excellent in both cases. Both bullets retained 100% of their weight. Retained length, that is the length of the bullet as it is pulled out of that ballistic gelatin. We like to see a good retained length here because that helps ensure that the bullet drives straight into the gel block. Now, we have no expansion on the Black Hills Honey Badger. Essentially, it could be reloaded again. Well, that's why the retained length is so much longer than with the Barnes bullet. The Barnes bullet expanded almost, so close to 200%, 199% expansion on that Barnes bullet, and it retained a 1/2 inch of its overall length after those petals peeled back. We didn't shed any petals. It didn't lose any of the petals of that mushrooming. It held on to all of those, so it peeled back very, very nicely, and we then retained that 1/2 inch on that shank to drive that bullet straight. And you saw that it really did drive pretty straight. I will note that this bullet and the Honey Badger, for whatever reason, as it was going through, I suspect because it was going through the jacket and the leather, that both of those on my first two shots veered off on the edge, along the edge of the gel block. And they went in about 1 inch, by the way, I should say, but they did peel off and then squirt out the side, so I had to do a second shot on both of those. So I will just note that. And I'll also note that to myself, don't shoot these things ever too close to those edges, because that may be something that happens fairly routinely. I don't know. But let me say a little bit more about the actual numbers. I've just shown you a quick summary using some percentages, but let's talk about the actual numbers. Barnes 115 grain, its expansion was 0.706 of an inch, getting close to 3/4 of an inch, and understand that 9mm bullet is 0.355 of an inch originally. That's the size of the caliber itself. So we're really, this thing is really expanding quite nicely. And of course, the Black Hills Honey Badger started at 0.355, ended at 0.355, so that's why we didn't get any great expansion on that. Now, you may be thinking, well, this is a toss-up. Both of the bullets went through the soft barrier without any problem. They performed correctly inside the gel block. 13 inches on one of those, a little bit over 13 inches of penetration. You saw them almost nestled together inside the gel block. How do you even choose a winner, right? Well, one thing that we can do is and I will show you this now, this is the maximum temporary wound channel, what we actually call the transient cavitation channel inside that gel block, as captured with that super slow-mo camera. And, you know, they look pretty good. They look all right. Nothing too dramatic on these. We did not see that gel block just about pick up and jump off of the table. We have seen that, and we probably will see that again later on in this year's worth of testing. But, you know, they kind of did their job. So a person might be thinking, choose what you like between these two. Now, the one difference, though, the one difference we cannot overlook is that expansion factor. So my question to you then is just to think about this. Which bullet do you think would cause more damage? Okay, we know that they penetrated just about the same. We'll call them the same for all intents and purposes. This bullet right here or that one right there. Right? Look at that frontal area. This thing, remember, it's spinning faster than a circular saw. These petals are going to be tearing things up as they go through that, in this case, the gel block. This is far more lethal than this. Now you might say, well, you know, what about that balloon effect, that temporary wound channel? What about that? In a handgun round, a slow-moving projectile like these, you get no lethality caused, or such minimal lethality caused by that temporary wound channel that it is more or less inconsequential. For that temporary wound channel to actually destroy tissue, soft tissue, that's all it's going to damage, by the way, soft tissue, inside the target, that bullet has to be traveling at over the speed of sound inside that medium. Now that's the kicker. A lot of people don't get that. The speed of sound inside the human body, inside a deer, inside an elk, those sort of critters, the mammals, probably birds as well. All right, 1900 feet per second. That's the rule of thumb. That bullet has to be traveling over 1900 feet per second to cause what's called a blast overpressure effect, destroying soft tissue inside that target. Neither one of these did that or can do that, not even close to that. Pretty much, we've got to move into the rifle bullets to get that sort of velocity. So don't be overly swayed by these kind of dramatic looking and kind of fun to look at temporary wound channels. No doubt about it, this is our winner. In fact, it scored over 400 points compared to 262 points for the Black Hills Honey Badger. Exactly, it was 412 points for the Barnes TAC-XPD. Now, I actually tested this Barnes TAC-XPD a number of years ago actually, in bare ballistic gelatin. Again, 20% NATO, again, 7 yards was the distance, but bare ballistic gelatin. And let's take a look at those results. The results from today's test shown in that first column, the results from the previous test with bare ballistic gelatin shown in the second column, or the column on the right. Extremely similar. Didn't shoot such a good tight group the first time, but the accuracy score very similar. Consistency of the ammo, now this is also kind of interesting. This is way down into the single digits with that box of ammo. So we're probably seeing some variability box to box with the Barnes factory ammo. Muzzle velocity, little bit different there as well. And because of the difference in muzzle velocity, we then, of course, see a slight difference in muzzle energy. Now, I'm not 100% sure that I shot that original group with the HK VP9. I note that because the HK-VP9, number one, is a fantastic pistol, but because of the polygonal rifling in that pistol, I tend to get higher muzzle velocities out of the HK-VP9 than I would out of our Beretta, Sig Sauer 320, etc., etc. So I'll throw that out there, and maybe some of these things that we're seeing that are slightly different were caused by a different gun used to fire these. I can go back and take a look at that. Let me know if you're interested in that. But I'm not too concerned about these slight differences that we're seeing in the Barnes XPD shot today versus how it was shot previously a number of years ago. Let's go back to that table and look at the terminal ballistic results. And this is really interesting. Look at that. Exactly the same penetration. Exactly the same weight retention. Pretty much exactly the same retained length. Pretty much the exact same expansion. Oh my gosh, what a consistent bullet, and exactly the same score. So this bullet proved itself. 412.5 points a number of years ago, 412.5 points in today's test. Yeah, that's a good bullet, and that wins our test today. Barnes TAC-XPD beats the Honey Badger. Now, in one of our upcoming tests, this Barnes XPD is going to be put against the S&B XRG that we tested previously, and it won its go-round. Now, it's not going to be the same test. I'm going to change things up. We've already shot Bullseye, so I'm going to dispense with that, and we're going to jump right into terminal ballistic testing. But it's going to be harder. You won't want to miss that one. I got some good stuff coming up. So, if you've got some questions on all of this stuff that we did today, feel free to post those into the comments section below. I'll try to answer your questions. And until next time, take care and thank you for watching.